I've always believed that a house isn't just made of bricks and paint. It's made of memories, laughter echoing through the hallways, the smell of morning tea, the creak of that one stubborn stair, and the warmth that never fades, even when the people inside do. My house, the one on Maple Drive, has stood for 42 years. It's where I raised my son Daniel, after my husband passed. It's where I survived heartbreak, loneliness, and every kind of silence that follows a loss. It's also where I watched the woman who called me Mom slowly turn into my enemy. Her name is Samantha. My daughter-in-law. My son's wife. And the woman who tried to steal the one thing I had left in this world, my home. But let me start from the beginning, before the lies, before the papers, before the betrayal that left me trembling in my own kitchen. Daniel was always a kind boy, too kind if you ask me. The kind of man who'd give away his coat in winter and go cold without complaint. He inherited his father's soft heart, but not his sharp instincts. When Samantha entered his life, I saw danger in her eyes long before Daniel saw beauty in her smile. She was charming, I'll give her that. Pretty, in a polished sort of way. Always dressed perfectly, even when she claimed they were struggling. When she first visited our home, she walked through the door like she already owned it, her perfume cutting through the familiar scent of jasmine I'd grown to love. "Mrs. Callahan," she said sweetly, "you have such a beautiful home.
It feel permanent. Permanent."
That word clung to me for years, even after the wedding. After Daniel married Samantha, things began to shift, subtly at first. She started making suggestions. "Maybe you should move to a smaller place, Mom," she'd say with that fake concern in her voice. "This house must be too much for you to handle alone."
Tout much for me?
I'd managed everything in that house, plumbing, paint, bills, long before she ever learned how to boil rice. I'd smile and change the subject, but she'd push again a week later. Then again. Until I realized it wasn't just conversation. It was a plan. The first rewrote crack appeared one spring afternoon. I was baking apple pie, Daniel's favorite. Samantha came over unannounced, carrying files and wearing that professional smile that always made me nervous. "Mom," she began, "I've been helping Daniel with some paperwork. You know how he forgets things." She laughed lightly, setting the files on the table. I noticed the top page had my name on it.
What is this?
I asked. "Oh, just some joint ownership updates," she said quickly.
You know, in case something ever happen.
It's safer if everything's shared among family. Family. I could have sworn she emphasized that word. I didn't sign, of course. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Still, that day something inside me shifted, a gut instinct, cold and sharp. From then on, I started watching her. Quietly. Carefully. Months passed. Daniel grew busier with work. Samantha took control of everything, his schedule, his bank accounts, his choices. Even his voice seemed quieter when she was around. And me? I became invisible in my own home. When they visited, Samantha would rearrange things, the furniture, the decorations, as if my living room was some showroom she was redesigning. She once even moved my husband's old armchair to the attic. When I asked why, she smiled and said, "Oh, it doesn't really fit the aesthetic anymore." The aesthetic. As if love and loss had a color palette. The real storm, though, began the day I overheard her on the phone. It was late, around midnight. I'd gone downstairs for a glass of water and heard her voice coming from the porch. "Yeah, the house is in her name, but not for long," she whispered. There was a pause. Then a laugh, low and cruel. "She's getting weaker every year. Once Daniel convinces her to move in with us, we'll handle the paperwork quietly. The old lady won't even know what hit her." My heart stopped. I remember standing there in the dark, clutching the stair railing, every breath loud in my ears. She wanted my house. Not because she needed it, but because she wanted me gone. I didn't confront her that night. I'm not one for dramatic fights or shouting matches. No, I decided something else instead, something colder, smarter. I started pretending to play her game. The next morning, I acted as though nothing happened. I even complimented her new hair color, a lifeless shade of blonde that made her look like every other suburban queen bee. But while she smiled and took the bait, I started preparing. I gathered every document I had, the deed, the will, the tax records, and moved them from the living room cabinet to my bedroom safe. Then, I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Greer, the same one who'd handled the house after my husband died. "Mrs. Callahan," he said after hearing my story, "you're right to be cautious. Don't sign a single paper. And if they ever try anything, call me first." I did as he said. And I waited. 2 months later, the trap was set, but not by me. It was Samantha who made the next move. One evening, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "Samantha and I were thinking, maybe it's time you moved in with us. The house is too big, and you shouldn't be alone." There it was, the pitch. Polite, rehearsed, and poisoned. I stayed quiet for a moment before replying, "I'll think about it." "Oh, that's wonderful." Samantha chimed in the background. "We can help you with the logistics. I even talked to a realtor who said the market's perfect for selling right now." Selling. The word burned through me. That was her goal, sell my home and make me a guest in her world. But what she didn't know was that I had already spoken to the bank, the lawyer, and even updated my will. The house was under a living trust, untouchable without my consent. She thought she was 2 steps ahead. She didn't realize I'd already finished the race. The weeks that followed were an act, a theater of lies. I played the frail, confused mother-in-law she wanted me to be. I pretended to misplace things, forget dates, and repeat stories. Sometimes I'd even call her sweetheart, just to make her comfortable. And it worked. She let her guard down. I watched her slowly circle the house like a vulture, taking pictures, calling contractors, even measuring walls when she thought I wasn't looking. Daniel stayed oblivious, poor thing. He still believed she was just trying to help. But I knew. Every glance, every whisper, every fake smile, I saw it all. Then came the breaking point. A knock at my door one afternoon, 2 men in suits, carrying clipboards. "Good afternoon, ma'am," one said. "We're here for the home appraisal. Your daughter-in-law scheduled it." My blood ran cold. I smiled politely and said, "I think there's been a mistake." They looked at each other, confused. "No, ma'am, it's under Mrs. Samantha Callahan's request." That was the moment I decided, this was war. That night, I invited them both for dinner. I made Daniel's favorite again, apple pie, roast chicken, and mashed potatoes. Samantha walked in wearing her usual smugness, a perfect little snake in silk. Dinner went smoothly at first. She complimented the meal, laughed, and played the dutiful wife. Then, when we finished dessert, she cleared her throat. "Mom, about the house. The realtor says we should list it soon. He can handle everything." "Oh," I said, calmly. "And whose name will be on the papers?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Well, yours, of course. But once you move in with us, it'll be easier if we transfer ownership." I finished for her, my voice sharp enough to slice the air. Daniel looked up, confused. "Mom, it's not what you think." "No, Daniel," I said, looking straight into his eyes. "I know exactly what it is." I reached under the table and pulled out a folder. Inside were the copies of the deed, the trust papers, and a letter from my lawyer. I placed them in front of Samantha. "You forgot whose name is on the deed," I said quietly. "And you forgot that I didn't raise a fool. I raised a man, not a puppet." Her face drained of color. Daniel's jaw fell open as he glanced through the papers. "Sam, what is this?" But she had no answer. Her lies had collapsed, and I could see the truth flickering behind her eyes. That night ended with shouting, tears, and a slammed door. Daniel left with her, confused, ashamed, heartbroken.
He stood by the window, watching them drive away, the taillicht fading into the dark. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her.
Almost. But pity is a luxury you can't afford when someone tries to destroy your life. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. It was from Samantha's lawyer, an accusation that I was mentally unfit to manage my property, requesting an evaluation to transfer legal guardianship to Daniel. The nerve. She was still trying. Still clawing at the walls of a fortress she'd never enter. That was when I decided to end it for good, not with rage, but with strategy.
Ical de Monsieur Greer.
"Let's make sure she never touches this house," I said. He replied, "Already 1 step ahead, Mrs. Callahan." That night, as I walked through the quiet rooms, the same ones that had seen laughter, love, and betrayal. I made myself a promise. I would protect my home, my legacy, and my dignity until my last breath. Because this wasn't just a house. It was my life. And no one, not even my son's wife, would take it from me. Not while my name was still on that deed. The day the lawyer's letter came was the day I stopped seeing Samantha as a threat and started seeing her as a disease that needed curing. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter, pale and expensive, stamped with her lawyer's name, Reynolds and Burke. I opened it carefully, though my hands trembled with the quiet rage of betrayal. It wasn't him speaking. It was her voice coming through him. He left soon after, saying he'd try to talk to her. I didn't stop him. Sometimes, silence is a sharper weapon than words. Days turned into weeks. Then one morning, I noticed something strange. My mail had stopped coming.
No bill, no flyer, no letters, no sign for 3 days.
When I called the post office, they told me someone had filed a change of address request under my name, forwarding my mail to Daniel's home.
Samantha is home.
That's when my hands began to shake. Not from fear, from fury. She wasn't just attacking my reputation now. She was trying to erase my existence. I drove to the post office myself, demanded they reverse the change, and filed a fraud report. The clerk, a nervous young man, stammered an apology. But I didn't need apologies. I needed proof. I requested a copy of the form. And there it was, my name, my signature, forged. Her handwriting was careful, but I recognized the loop of the G in Margaret. I'd seen it before, on my birthday cards. She'd practiced. Planned. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my husband's armchair, staring into the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. If she wanted a war, she had just declared it. The next morning, I started planning. Not just to defend myself, but to destroy her, piece by piece, without ever touching her.
He started recording things.
Every call, every visit. I bought a small voice recorder, kept it hidden under the lace tablecloth on the dining table. When Daniel visited, I let him speak freely, and he did. One evening, his phone buzzed. He answered, put it on speaker. Samantha's voice filled the room, sharp and impatient. Did you convince her yet? The longer she stays there, the more expensive this gets. You need to make her sell. Daniel's eyes darted toward me, he'd forgotten I was right there. He fumbled to end the call, muttering something about wrong timing. But it was too late. I had it all, her voice, her intent, her crime. I transferred the recording to my computer, emailed a copy to Mr. Greer. He called back that night, his voice tight with satisfaction. Margaret, you've just turned the tables. Don't say a word to her. Let her keep digging. I smiled for the first time in months. Don't worry, I said. I'll even hand her the shovel. A week later, Samantha came to visit, dressed to perfection, her smile gleaming like polished glass. Mom, she began, I think we got off on the wrong foot.
I just want what is best for you.
Oh, I know, I said sweetly.
You always do.
She hesitated, then pulled out another folder. I talked to a financial advisor. He said it's risky for seniors to keep property under their name alone. Maybe we could transfer it temporarily, just for... I burst out laughing, a sharp, humorless laugh that made her flinch.
Oh, Samantha, he said, leaning forward.
You must think I'm very stupid. Her smile faltered. Excuse me. I've seen women like you before, I said quietly. They marry for comfort, not love. They decorate lives they didn't build and call it achievement. But there's one thing you'll never understand. She crossed her arms.
And what is that? He stood, my voice rising, steady and cold.
This house was built by sweat, grief, and love, not manipulation. You can steal papers, signatures, and even my son's trust. But you'll never own what's mine. For a moment, her mask cracked. Her eyes hardened, her voice dripping venom. You think you can stop me? Daniel listens to me now. Not you. You're just a lonely old woman clinging to walls. I smiled. Then enjoy the echo. Because that's all you'll have when I'm done. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. But I didn't flinch. I'd already won. She just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, Daniel called again. Mom, you really need to stop. Sam's saying you threatened her. I almost laughed. Did she also tell you she forged my signature? There was a pause. What are you talking about? Ask her about the mail. About the post office. And while you're at it, ask her who she was talking to on speakerphone last week. Silence. Then, a quiet, shaken voice. I'll call you back. That was the last time he called for nearly a month. In that silence, I found peace. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again, like it was breathing with me, guarding me. I tended to the garden, baked again, even played my husband's old records in the evenings. But I knew it wasn't over. A snake doesn't die from one strike. It coils, waits, and returns. And she did. One chilly morning, there was a knock at my door. 2 police officers stood there, polite but distant. Mrs. Callahan, we received a welfare check request from your daughter-in-law, one said. She claimed you might be experiencing confusion and neglecting your own care. I stared at them, speechless for a moment. Then I smiled, calm, deliberate. Would you like to come in for tea? They looked around my spotless home, the neatly arranged shelves, the fresh bread on the counter. One officer even complimented the smell. When they left, one of them whispered quietly, "She clearly doesn't know who she's messing with." I watched them leave, my hands steady once more. That night, I opened my safe. Inside were the original documents, the deed, the trust, and now, the police report of the false welfare claim. I added the forged mail form and the voice recording printout, sealing them all together. Then, I wrote a letter. Not to Samantha, to Daniel. My dear son. You are my heart, but you've been blinded by someone who only sees you as a means to an end. I won't fight you. I won't beg. When you finally see the truth, you'll know where to find it, in the walls you grew up within, and the name that still guards them. Love, Mom. I sealed the envelope and tucked it into the top drawer of my desk. Then I sat back in my chair and waited, because I knew the day of reckoning was close. It came faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, Daniel arrived at my door, looking broken. Mom. I found the recording, he said quietly. I said nothing. She lied. About everything. The house, the mail, even the lawyer thing. I can't believe I didn't see it. I looked at him for a long moment. You wanted to see the best in her. That's not a sin, Daniel. But trusting the wrong person always costs something. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm sorry. I nodded, my throat tight.
You're my son.
You'll always have my forgiveness. But she won't. He looked confused. What do you mean? I handed him another envelope. Give this to her, I said. And don't come back until she reads it. That envelope contained the one thing she'd never recover from, her own downfall. Inside was a formal notice from my lawyer, a defamation lawsuit, charges for mail fraud, and a certified copy of the voice recording transcript. And on top of it all, a restraining order. That night, Daniel called again. His voice was shaking.
She's gone.
Packed her things. Said she's going to stay with her sister. She looked terrified.
I closed my eyes, a sense of victory washing over me.
She forgot whose name is on the deed, I said softly. For weeks after, the silence felt heavy, not sad but peaceful.
The garden bloomed again.
The sun hit the porch the same way it always did when Daniel was little. And sometimes when I walked past the front door, I could almost feel my husband's presence, proud, amused, whispering, "You did it, Maggie. You protected what we built." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end.
Women like Samantha don't disappear.
They retreat, lick their wounds, and wait for another chance. And I was ready, because the next time she came for my home, I wouldn't just defend it.
They burn her lies to ashes.
When you spend long enough with the idea that someone might take your life away from you, you become a student of patience. You learn the art of waiting, of watching, of letting the other person make the mistakes necessary to entangle themselves. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, and now I was waiting for Samantha to make the fatal one. She retreated for a while, but she didn't disappear. People like her are persistent, they are tide-like, pulling back only to crash harder. I felt it like a slow pressure against the outer walls of my life, an almost imperceptible tremor. Every creak of the house at night sounded more urgent, every unfamiliar car on the street made me hold my breath. Then she returned. It was a grey morning when she knocked. The sky had the flat color of old dishwater, and the porch light still hummed from the night. I opened the door as always, not stunned, not surprised. There was a weight to the way she stood, small but unbroken, like a dog that had been beat and still dared to wag its tail. "Samantha," I said. Her eyes darted past me, sizing up the hallway, the family photos. She smiled, the practiced smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something raw at the edge of her face like a wound. "Margaret," she said, "can we talk?" I closed the door behind her and led her to the kitchen table where we had fought and schemed and once shared pie. For a long time she didn't speak. She watched me instead, the table, the old brass teapot, my hands folded like someone folding up a map. "Why are you here?" I asked. She swallowed, then reached into her bag and pushed a thin envelope across the table. "I'm here to make things right." The envelope was heavy. I didn't open it immediately. Instead I watched her watch me. The world between us had narrowed to the distance of a table and a piece of paper. "Make things right," I repeated. This is a curious phrase from someone who broke into my life and tried to burn it to the ground. Her jaw tightened. I was desperate. I made bad choices. She stopped, and for the first time I heard the tremor of a woman who had been frightened into cruelty. I did not interrupt. I let her say it. People who have been forced into confession rarely stop at the first word. "I'm pregnant," she blurted, desperately, like the news might save her. "I'm having a baby, Margaret. I thought if I secured our future." The words hit the room like a thrown vase. My first reaction was a cold, practical arithmetic. A child would complicate everything. But then my heart softened with a mischievous, dangerous tenderness. Vulnerability wears many faces, some of them ugly, some of them pleadingly human. "You should have thought of that before you forged my name, Samantha," I said quietly. Tears filled her eyes. Real ones. She looked younger when she cried, but that only made her look more childlike and more dangerous. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "I can't do that. But I need time. I need help for the baby. And I want to give Daniel the life he deserves." She expected me to be flattered, to be mollified. She didn't understand that she had used her pregnancy as an attempt to cement something she tried to steal. She had weaponized life. There's a kind of moral ugliness in that has a way of sticking in your throat. I folded the envelope open. Inside was a letter from a social worker, some prenatal care appointment slips, and a photocopy of a check, a small meager check made out to Margaret Callahan. She slid it over with hands that trembled as if the motion itself could atone. "You think money can fix what you broke?" I said. "No," she said, and there was a sliver of honesty. "But maybe you could help me get through this. Just until the baby is born. Then I'll leave. I promise." It should have been simple to refuse. Instead I surprised myself by agreeing, on one condition. "You will sign an agreement," I said slowly. "A contract. You will receive assistance, but no claim to this house. No contact with my accounts, no attempts to change anything again. You will not interfere with my son. And if you break the agreement, I will press charges for everything you've done." I watched her face with the same attention I had once given a clock waiting for midnight. She nodded so quickly I thought her head would bob like a bird. "Yes. Yes, anything." We called Mr. Greer. I asked him to draft something airtight, a document that would not be dismissed as the whim of a senile old woman. He obliged, swift, curt and precise, the kind of paper that leaves no room for theater, only legal consequences. Samantha signed, the lines of her fingers trembling. She looked at me as if the signature itself might change her. That night she left with a small bag and a promise. The next morning she phoned me like a ghost in need of shelter. I let her. Sometimes you have to let the snake coil where it will so you can decide where to cut. For a while, things quieted. The newspaper delivery returned to my door. Daniel called tentatively more often. The house seemed to breathe again. I maintained a thin, vigilant smile. I knew this calm. It wasn't peace, it was a lull before another storm. Samantha's presence was a study in nervous energy. She called about prenatal vitamins. She asked advice about names. She cried about cravings. She even baked, poorly, but with effort, and dropped off a pie that tasted of regret and cheap cinnamon. I accepted it. I invited her in for coffee. I asked questions that made her squirm. I let her talk until she wore herself out. People like Samantha are fragile when they're not on offense. They fall apart without the mask they use to command. I used that. 1 month after she returned, my phone rang in the small hours. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman I didn't know, a neighbor from across the street.
Mrs. Callahan? I'm so sorry to wake you.
But your son, he's here. He's drunk and there's a woman with him. They're shouting. I think it's Samantha. I thought you should know. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady when I called Mr. Greer. He arrived in his old Navy car within the hour, more a presence of law than friendship. He sat at my table with a cup of coffee and listened while I recounted the call. We need evidence, he said. We need things that show pattern, intent, and harm. An accusation from a neighbor and an emotional confession won't suffice in court if she fights hard. She will. She's already proven she will. He was right. And so I began what might look like petty to some. I started a ledger. Not just for bankrolls and checks, but for moments, everything Samantha did that could be stored, logged, time-stamped. She brought receipts that contradicted her testimony. I kept them. She said things to my friends that she later denied. I wrote their accounts down and asked them to sign. We collected what we could: appointment cards, copies of threatening texts, a list of forged documents, the mail fraud report, the police visit notes, the previous restraining order. But the most important piece of evidence, the one that would finally pull the whole net tight, came from a direction I hadn't anticipated: Daniel. The distance between a son and his mother may be measured in unspoken things, but it can be crossed if the son remembers how his mother wiped his tears and fixed his scraped knees. After the welfare check, after the recordings, after the confrontation with the forged mail, Daniel had retreated into his shame. He was a man fighting his own pride and his misplaced love. But one night, after he'd gone to bed drunk and angry, he stumbled into my house and sat at my kitchen table with a face like a man who had lost confidence. I can't do this anymore, he said. The words of a man who'd been used, misled, and now felt like a coward for having allowed it. I lied to myself because I wanted to believe she was different. He told me everything: the manipulations, the secret she kept, the lies she told to their friends, the ways she'd isolated him. He produced messages and receipts, admissions she'd made in confidence. He handed me his own set of mistakes written down like contrition on paper. He wanted to help, to atone. I could have stood up and wept then, but I didn't. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand. You did what you thought was best for a while, I told him. That's human. The evidence he supplied was the missing shard of glass that made the whole mirror reflect properly. With it we convened a meeting with Mr. Greer and the detectives who'd shown a peculiar interest in Samantha's paper trail. We laid everything out: the ledger of petty crimes, the forged mail pieces, the recorded conversations where she spoke of getting the house, the financial irregularities that suggested she'd been siphoning small sums here and there. The system does not always move quickly. It did in this case because Samantha, confident and careless, left a trail. Greed leaves footprints. So does desperation. We filed charges: mail fraud, attempted coercion, forging signatures, and an array of civil motions related to the trust she had tried to breach. The judge assigned the case to a sympathetic magistrate, one who had the kind of patience that means he listens to details that others ignore. The day the court date arrived, I wore a dress my grandmother would have recognized, sensible, plain, and entirely mine. I sat at the front of the courtroom while Samantha strode in like a small storm, her hair curled, her eyes wide with rehearsed defiance. Daniel sat beside her, but he wasn't her shield anymore. The look on his face was too raw for that role. The hearings were a slow, public unmasking. Witnesses testified: neighbors, the post office clerk who had identified the forged change of address, the social worker who confirmed Samantha's inconsistent statements, and Mr. Greer who walked through the trust with a methodical fury. Our recordings were played. Our copies of documents were entered into evidence. The judge, a man who had seen too many human dramas in his lifetime, asked precise questions that made Samantha stumble. She tried to charm him, as she had tried to charm every new audience. But charm in a courtroom is thin. Facts are heavy. The judge asked her whether she had signed any documents on Margaret's behalf. She lied. The prosecutor produced the forgery. She lied some more. The magistrate's gaze hardened. "Do you understand that forging signatures is a crime?" he asked. It was like a gavel struck somewhere inside her. She began to cry then, not the same tears she'd once shed in my kitchen. These were the brittle public tears of someone being unmade in front of a crowd. There was a moment when she glared at me, as if I had personally tortured her. I met her stare and felt nothing but a cold, steady pity. Pity is not the same as mercy. The case resolved as cases often do, with something that felt like justice. Samantha pleaded guilty to charges that could have cost her more but would also set her up for a chance to change. She received a suspended sentence contingent on restitution, counseling, and community service. She was barred from contacting me or coming within a certain distance of my property. The judge ordered monitoring of her finances for a time. The restraint was precise and surgical. It was not total ruin, and I had deliberated long on whether I wanted total ruin. Revenge is a dish people often heat until it is bitter. I could have seen her imprisoned, her life broken beyond repair. But a part of me remembered being young and frightened and making wrong choices. A part of me, the part that had once fixed scraped knees, wanted to see the person she might become under hard lessons, not the person crushed into bitterness.
Daniel Hugues de Meuin the Courtouzolway.
He cried then the way men in their 40s rarely do, his body shaking with a remorse so deep it looked like a curtain tearing. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my hair.
"I failed you."
"You didn't," I told him. "You were loved into blindness."
"But you're here now."
He left that day carrying a fragile, trembling responsibility, to rebuild, to learn, to be better. He would go to counseling. He would undo what had been broken. He would, I hoped, find his center and remain there. Samantha's life went quiet in a way that made it look like she had died and been reborn as someone much smaller. She moved out of town.
The gossip gardens of our neighborhood found new bloom.
People have short memories, but they retain impressions. The smell of a pie, the sight of an angry fist, the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to be removed from her life. I returned to my house like a captain returning to a ship that had been through a storm. The walls smelled of lemon and old wood. My husband's armchair sat where I had put it back months ago. I walked through the rooms and named them like an incantation: kitchen, den, porch, garden. I let my fingers brush the banister and the wallpaper, and somehow the ordinary acts of cleaning and tending felt like prayer. A small thing happened then that I did not expect. On an ordinary afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to me in a handwriting that trembled. It was from Samantha. She thanked me. She told me in a halting way that she had gone to counseling as required, that she had entered a program to work on her consumption of other people, and that she was pregnant after all, but that she had decided to give her baby a life without the toxic cycles she had been trapped in. She wrote that she hoped one day, if she ever deserved it, to meet me and tell me face to face that she was trying to be better. Her words were small and unpolished, but they were not manipulative. If they had been, I would have burned them. They were an apology that felt like a white flag. I wrote back not with scorn or pity but with something careful and human. I told her I hoped she would keep her promises. I told her that a house is more than a deed. It is a place where people become who they are, for good or for ill. I told her I forgave her the way you forgive a dog that bit you because it was afraid. That forgiveness did not free her of consequence. It was not an eraser, only a compass. The law had done its work. The trust had been reinforced. The house remained in my name and under my protection. I had not destroyed her, I had contained her. Sometimes containment is the most humane form of revenge. Months later Daniel married again. It was a small private ceremony with a woman who knew our history and seemed to understand the contours of our lives without trying to redraw them. He asked me to come, and I walked down a narrow aisle of folding chairs with a dress that had seen too many seasons. When he looked at me as he promised his vows, there was no trace of the man who had let himself be manipulated. He was steady. He was present. From where I stood, in the cluttered, imperfect congregation of family and friends, I understood something large and carnival bright. The thing that the house had protected was not the physical structure but a continuity of love, stubbornness, and memory. We are tenants of our choices, sometimes we are caretakers of our past. I had held on, and in doing so had given my son a chance to relearn the architecture of his own life. Years passed. The house stayed. My hair turned silver in a way that caught sunlight like a halo. I tended my garden and grew tomatoes that tasted of summer and stubbornness. Visitors came and left, but the house remained, like an island that refused to sink even when storms lashed at its shores. Once, late at night, after the world had folded into sleep and the porch light had gone out, I sat on the steps and listened. There was a soft rustle, perhaps a fox in the yard, perhaps the wind. I thought of Samantha far away, of a child who might grow up without my blood but with a lesson learned about wrong choices, and of a son who had come back to himself. I did not feel triumphant or joyous. I felt strangely, like a woman who had cleaned a wound and then watched it scar over, not perfectly, but resiliently. That, I thought, is the truest kind of victory, not to break the other person, but to survive and become the person you were meant to be all along. I rose, went inside, and turned the key in the lock. The house welcomed me the way it always had, with the creak of floorboards and the familiar draft near the kitchen window. I placed the deed back in the safe, where it belonged, under the watchful eyes of photographs that had seen everything: joy, anger, loss, the terrible smallness of human error, and the surprising mercy that sometimes follows it. When I lay down that night, I did so with the knowledge that I had won a war without losing my soul. The house had not only remained my refuge, it had been my teacher. It taught me that the line between revenge and justice is drawn by restraint and intention, and that the heart, even when wounded, can choose to be larger. Outside, somewhere far away, a woman might be giving birth to a child and taking the first trembling steps toward being a better person. Inside, in my house, I slept. The rooms around me breathed softly, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt like the slow, steady end of a storm, not the silence left by victory or defeat, but the quiet that follows a long, honest reckoning.